Photoshop. And we're going to see, obviously, I've done some work here already to get ahead of the curve. But one thing you'll see, let's just open up that texture we created, texture vid, images, and bottle UVs right there. Okay, that's what we just created. I'm going to open that up. Right, and you'll see that it loads in. It's difficult to see, right, because the lines are so thin. But if I create a new layer, layer 1, and put it underneath the layer that we started with, layer 0, and fill it with black, there's our UVs, right? They're all laid out nicely. Zoom in 1 to 1, and you can see you've got all the detail that you need. Okay, so obviously, like I said, we're going to be replacing our color here, our color texture, right? So one thing we have to remember is that when we load in our color texture, we're going to lose whatever we put in here before, okay? Because when we look at our shader, we're going to be remapping this attribute right here. And this attribute right now is only loaded with this color swatch. So when we reload it, we're going to lose this color swatch that we've chosen. So we got to remember that when we get to Photoshop. And we're going to start with the blue that we had. You see, I had my black here that I got rid of, and I just switched it in with the blue. Now, if we were to just start with this, right, and I always remember to turn off your UVs. I'm going to rename this so it's clear. You don't want to map those back onto your object because then it just looks like you've got a wireframe rendered on top. So we're going to turn those off, and we're going to save as, right? And we're going to put this right into our source images and say, there we go, and say bottle color. And I'm going to give it a nice little version number, version 1, PNG. Make sure that you switch it down here since Photoshop doesn't like renaming it, doing it for you. Okay, so there we are. PNG, save. And oh, that's fine. Okay, so now we've got our blue color. If we swap back over to Maya, we're going to go to our color attribute here, and I'm going to click the little checkerboard to create a node that gives us the ability to map something new into there. So we have access to, of course, all of our textures, right? Really, we only are interested, in this case, our 2D textures, and not all of them, just the file texture right here at the top. So I'm going to give that a click. Right, and what has happened in that click is that not only did it create a file texture, and you'll see if I get over here. Right, here's our blend, right? Now, it doesn't look like anything's happened here, but if I do graph my input and output connections, you'll see down there, that it has in fact not even created my, not just created my image texture, but also attached it right into my color. And if I mouse over that, I can see out color into blend color. That's what I want. Okay, so I'm going to select my texture that we created, bottle color. Okay, and open that. And you'll see that it loads, it doesn't put anything in here, right? At a certain size, Maya decides it's not worth rendering the thumbnail all the time, but a simple double click, and it renders it for you, right? So now we're back actually to where we started with a texture applied, and it's blue, right? Looks exactly the same. Okay, so now what we would like to do is apply our logo into there. Okay, so again, we need, I just want to have a quick refresher of where to put it in here. So a good way to do this, and a really simple way, is to make sure we are looking at our hypershade. I don't need my, we'll need my attribute editor soon. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a ramp 2D texture. So I'm just going to create one right here, right, and it puts it up in here. You'll notice that it always brings along this place 2D. And I'm going to drop it onto my Blinn with my middle mouse button. So that's just a middle mouse button click, drag, and drop. And a menu pops up, and I'm going to choose color, right? So we've just actually just replaced what we just put in there, okay? But this is just a way to check something, okay? So I'm going to select this ramp, and I'm going to go back to my view here. And you can see that my bottle now has this ramp that travels from the bottom to the top. To make this a little bit more isolated, I'm going to switch my interpolation from linear to none, and you'll see that that just makes hard lines in our ramp. And I'm going to slide my green down till it looks like it's sort of at the bottom of where I would want any kind of logoing to happen. And I'm going to slide my blue until I get the same result for the top, right? So I can see like that's my zone that I want to be putting my texture into, okay? I can check it over in my UV texture editor here. And you can get an idea of where these faces are going to be and where it is in your space here, right? So with that in mind, I can be a little bit smart about where I put my logo, right? So let's get back to where we were before, right? Just after our little check, put that back into color, and I'm going to head back over to Photoshop. So in my UVs, again, it's tough to see, but I know that from looking at my Maya file that that my zone for texture creation is sort of fitting in these three sections of large faces here. Large face here, big face here, and a big face here. So in this zone is where I want to be creating my texture, my logo rather. So I've done that already, just for the essence of time here. So I'm going to turn that on, right? So H2O, I've got a little list of how much is in there, and that's fine. So with that, I'm just going to save that out, right? So this would be creating whatever you want to create. File. I'm going to do another save as, and back to our source images and bottle color, right? PNG, PNG. Now at this stage, you know, it's a good idea to actually save the document that you're already working in, right? So I'm going to save this Photoshop document, right? So I'm just going to put it back in that same, so I don't keep bouncing around all the time. I'm going to put it in that same folder here. So I'm going to call this Bottle Textures version 1. Okay, so as I version up, I'll be able to keep track of which one of these came from which version of the file that I'm working on. Okay. All right, so I've got all of that saved out. So I'm going to go back into Maya, and I'm going to reload this PNG, right? I just saved over it, so I'm just going to hit reload. Right there, I can see my text, and if I pop over to my viewport, there it is on the bottle. Okay, so that's good news, right? So we've got the color mapped onto our bottle, and we should be happy about that, all right? Except the one thing that we are not too happy about is the fact that our transparency is applied to both the bottle itself and our logo. Okay, so which is not at all where we are with our reference. We slide that over here. You can see that our screen print on our logo is completely opaque. All right. So the next step will be to make this differentiation happen. Okay, the differentiation between a very transparent bottle and a very opaque logo. Okay, so let's do that next. So how do we do that? Well, an easy way to do it here is to take a look at what we've got going on already, and we're going to pop over to look at our shader. Do this however you wish to do it. Got it right here, load it into my attribute editor. I'm just going to look at this right here. I know from before that raising my transparency up off of black makes something more transparent, and black means that it is not transparent at all or completely opaque. So in my mind, this is the percentage of transparency that you have, right? Black being 0 and white being 1. So we'll take a look at the color values here. All right, in our case, we've got this color value of 0.735. And I think if I remember correctly, when I did this before, 0.8 is really a nice value for that transparency. So we'll call it 0.8. So between 0.8, which is our transparency level for the bottle, and 0, right, which is completely opaque, that's where we need to go. We need to say, okay, for everything that's the bottle, we need to be 0.8, and everything that is the screen printing, we need to be 0. Okay, so keeping those numbers in mind, 0.8 and 0, we can go back to our Photoshop document. Right, and here we know that 0.8 is the value for everything that we want to have blue, and everything that is our logo, we want to be, like I said, 0. So the way to do this pretty easily here is to take our text layer, right, and I'm going to duplicate it, right, so I have a second version, and I'm going to take my color layer here. I'm going to duplicate that. It doesn't really matter. You can create a new one. It's just a big solid document. I'm going to put it underneath my new text layer, right? And so now these two here represent what the work we just did, right? Okay, or I can call it bottle color. I'm going to select these and I'm going to group them like this. Oh, well, that just creates a new group. I'm just going to drag this in here, okay? And I'm going to call this group color, right? Because that represents everything that I want to have my color. Now up here, I'm going to create a new group, select these two, Command G, bloop, and I get a new group with those inside of it. I'm going to call this one transparency. Okay, so in here, what we know, as always, is that, I close this tab group here. We know that this is a color that we want to be 0.8. So how do we get in Photoshop? How do we get 0.8? Right, we have our different options of looking at color values here, and they're not really telling us anything useful, except we can go down to like here and we can look, right? So it'll tell us our color values. So what we want to do is we want to fill this whole blue background with a value of 0.8, or what in Maya will be 0.8. Okay, so in Photoshop, we're going to click on our document here, get our color picker, right? We have our HSV. Well, it should say V, but they consider V to be brightness. In Maya, it's HSV, and that's considered value. In Photoshop, it's HSB and considered brightness. So brightness here is a value between 100% and 0. All right. So if we just mentally say, okay, what is the 0.8 equivalent of 100%? It is 80%. Okay. So we can really just dial this in by a 0, and 80. So that's 80%. I'm going to fill it like this. Okay. So that gets that step done. Now the next step is getting all of our text here to be black. So this, I'm not entirely sure the best way to do this. Maybe there's a way to activate a clip mask with a hue saturation. Can I do a clip mask here? And sorry that this is, whoops, experimental here for the video, but I think, boop, there we go. That's for all of transparency. What I want to do is a clip mask for the text. Okay. Well, that's good news. All right, so let's take a look at what we just did there, right? I created this goes below here, but by selecting a filter layer, I can create this hue saturation one, and now I can do the same thing. I can, I can make that completely black, right? So that's an easy way to make that completely black. Now, obviously, I couldn't make it any other value here. I'd have to use a different methodology, perhaps solid color. No, never mind. So this works for us here. We're going to go completely black on this. So now we have, so if you see what we've done there is, and the reason why I did it this way, instead of rasterizing all of this into one big bunch, is because you never know what's going to change, right? And if you do change something in your color layer, it's going to be a lot easier to duplicate this group and bring it up under your correction for this to make it the solid color. Okay. So, but the overall effect is no matter what methodology you want to use, the idea is that we get our value to 0.8 in the places that we want it to be transparent and our value to 0 in the places where we want it to be completely opaque. And that's that. All right, so now we're going to save this as bottle transparency. I just call it bottle trans. Version 1, JPEG, or PNG rather. Save that and say OK. All right, now we'll pop over to Maya. And I'm going to delete this guy. We don't need him anymore. And I'm going to create a new file texture to apply to this. And now instead of doing it over here, I'm going to create it here, right? File. And bring these guys in. And I'm going to look at this, and I'm going to load my trans, right? That's what we want. Open. I'm going to double click it to see it. I'm going to drop it onto transparency. All right, so what did that just happen? All right, so this is an unexpected result, right? Because this is the blue that we wanted it to be, the transparency level that we were just looking at, but it switched over and it had become much more opaque. So my first gut instinct would be, well, maybe this is just rendering a mistake here. So I'm going to do a quick render of my object. Well, and here, obviously, the viewport is supporting what we saw there, right? So 2 strikes against what we're seeing. But let's render it and be sure, right? So do a quick render. And we'll take a look. Yes, it is, in fact, completely solid or mostly solid of a color, right? Maybe there's a touch of transparency, but difficult to say. In this case, so that is clearly not what we want to have happen, right? So what happened? Well, let's take a look. Now, it's difficult, not too difficult to see here. But let's mouse over this and see where we're connecting. Remember, our color goes out color to color, and we go here, out transparency to transparency. Well, certainly transparency is something we want, but out transparency is sort of a mystery channel. I don't really know what that is. I am going to check the node editor. I can do that by selecting my shader, and I'm going to come over to my node editor here, and I'm just going to graph it so I get a clear view of what's happening. Here's my little view. Here's the shader, so I can open that and see that that's going into transparency. It's what I want. I'm going to pop this open. It says out transparency. Okay, out transparency. I have no idea what that is, right? I don't know if that's an alpha channel or what. If I open this more, I can see that there is actually an alpha channel output. Transparency is something else, okay? And Maya is clearly making an assumption as to what we think that should be. Now, when we made our texture here in Photoshop, we know that the color that we applied here is the value that we want to have mapped, okay? So if we pop back over to Maya, we can drag this arrow, and I'm just going to click on the line here close to, but not on this little dot, right? And I can take it, and I'm just going to get close to out color and drop it on, right? It should snap eventually, right? So, and you see that our thumbnail has updated in a positive manner, right? Now, let's see over here. Okay, so this doesn't look any different. This looks kind of the same, but I'm going to render it anyway because our thumbnail said that something changed. And by golly, everything looks pretty good. Now, we're looking here. We can see there's a little intersection with the floor plane. That's something tricky you have to worry about with transparent objects. But in general, this looks pretty good, right? We have our transparency. That's a positive thing. But we also have our opacity here, completely opaque for our label. So that's a win-win. Now, this does bring up another problem. All right, we can see something odd here. So let's take a look. Let's look at what exactly is happening there, right? Render that. We're probably well at the limits of our texture resolution. And we'll just let this render out so we can see. And there. Okay. Looks like we're getting a double result. And what's happening here is that we are mapping to both the inside and the outside wall of our object. Okay, so we do have to repair this. We looked at our UVs and they looked pretty good, but clearly our UVs are overlapping here. Okay, and let's close this out and we'll pop over to our UVs. Select, pop over. Right? And if we can see, well, I'm going to turn off my texture here, or at least, yeah, I'll just remove it. I'm going to turn on my shaded view using this selection here. Aha, there we are. Everything looks purple, which means that somewhere under here is a red and a blue mixed together. Blue being proper and red being reversed and overlapping, right? So let's get rid of that, right? So we know that that's the interior surface, right? Even if we zoom out here and take a look on the inside, right? We can look in there. We can see that there it is, right? It's on the inside. So how do we separate this out in a logical way? Well, it's going to be pretty straightforward. Unfortunately, if we look here, this is probably all one shell, right? Maybe what happened is it got cylindrically mapped in one shot, and they thought that was good enough. Well, we're going to use this little tool here, the Move UV Shell tool. Right? We're just going to click once, right? It selects the whole shell, and if we move, you see, oh yeah, it's all one big shell. All right, so let's undo that, and we will head back over to our viewport, and we'll do what comes logically next, which is to take this edge here, where it's the beginning of the inside and the end of the outside, and I'm going to double click that edge, right? And we get the edge loop, right? That selects the whole thing, and pop over to our texture editor. You can see right here at the top, there it is. And I'm going to use our cut UVs along selected edge. Right now that generates two shells, right? And take my word for that. Here's the way to check it. Here, you know, we've got a lot of overlapping UVs. Oh boy, I'm gonna do panels. UV texture editor. Oh, everything's overlapping, so it's going to be difficult to select a shell here. I'm just going to do a quick face selection on the inside. That's just the inside face, okay? Nothing select, one face on the inside selected. Right, there it is. And I'm going to use this super delightful menu here, the select menu, which allows us to do a whole bunch of nice conversions, right? First of all, I'm going to select select shell right here, right, which is going to select everything inside of the shell that our initial selection is inside, right? So if I let this go, you'll see that that selected a whole bunch of faces. We'll pop over here to our, oh, nothing on the outside, but we rotate, there's everything on the inside, right? So we've selected that shell. And then once again, we're going to say select. We're going to say convert selection to UVs. Right, so now we've got UVs of our interior object. There we are, all right? So if we needed to map something on the inside, ultimately what we'd have to do is flip this, right, to get it into proper direction, right, which would be this little wonderful button here. Boop. And we'd have to place it right on top and stitch them together, right? That would give us one continuous surface that travels from the outside all the way to the inside. But we don't really care about that. In fact, I'm not planning on mapping anything to the inside, right? The inside of the bottle is nice and clean, right? So let's keep it that way. We just want this to be supporting our blue and transparent that we've got going on for the rest of the bottle. With that in mind, I don't even have to really worry about keeping this the same size as our previous texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink it down enough to fit it back into our UV layout. If I need to put anything on there, maybe I still have space to do it, but it's just going to be low res and it won't matter. So I can do that, right? So there we go. So that's a UV layout that's going to support what we were going to do here. So another render. Dramatic pause, and there we go. No more doubled up. Looks good. Still supporting all of our transparencies, our opacities. There's the wall. Everything looks good. I'm happy. Okay, so let's stop this. The next thing we want to do is worry about the next part of our reference.
Shut up and sit down.